I think I shook hands, gave him a hug and a fist pump at one point.
Did you share a glass and sneeze?
I'm sure we did. Everything but, I guess.
I have a good friend in.
Okay, you can go ahead and start the meeting, Jean.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. It is 3:01 on Monday, the 23rd. We'll call this meeting of the Project and Services Committee for LAFTA to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Vice Chair Bonanno,
Here.
Director Brown,
Here.
Director Halbert,
Present.
Chair Josie.
And I am here as well. Thank
We
you.
have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Our first item of business is the meeting open to the public. Members of the audience may address the committee on any matter that is within our general subject matter jurisdiction, and people have 3 minutes to do so. Do we have any members of the public that wish to address us today?
I see that we do have 2 attendees. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Nobody is raising their hand, and I did not receive any public comment via email.
Okay. We will then move on to item number 4, which is minutes from the April 25th meeting of the Projects and Services Committee.
Move approval, Albert.
Second, Banana.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any comments? Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Vice Chair Bonanno,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Aye.
Director Halbert,
Aye.
Chair Josie.
Aye, so that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to item number 5, which is the short range transit plan for 2022 to 2027. And I would assume that we have a staff report for this.
Yes, we do. This is mine.
Hi, Tony.
Good afternoon. I have some new glasses and I think I need the anti-glare to be adjusted on these things. I've got these crazy blue dots in the middle of my eyeballs.
Tony, I'll show you a trick. Take
Yeah.
these and adjust them just a tiny bit so they sit above your ears and there's a slight downward tilt. There you
There
go.
we go. All right, we'll try that. All right. So this is an action item recommended to go to the board, and it is our 5-year short-range transit plan. In 2019, the board awarded a contract to the consulting firm of Nelson Nygaard to do a 5-year short-range transit plan and a 20-year long-range transit plan. And then, of course, as soon as they were starting the project and doing the research for the existing conditions section, something called COVID hit. And so we hit the brake pedal for a little bit and then have decided to just go ahead and go forward with this document because it is a requirement from the MTC for us to submit this document in order to be a part of their funding document over there. So Thomas Whitman with Nelson Nygaard is here, and he has a presentation that will run you through the SRTP.
Great.
Let me start running you through this, get this set up. Just give me a sec. And here we go. All right. Welcome to see you again. I just want to apologize too if there's any background noise. I'm in a slightly louder environment than I typically am. So if there is something, please let me know. I'd be happy to repeat. There's 4 things we want to talk about today, including, the initial impacts and response on COVID that Tony had mentioned. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing in, how to restore service? And then what are the priorities that the short range transit plan has laid out to say, as we think about as revenue recovers and some of the challenges dissipate, how are we going to do this and what are some of the next steps? So as Tony mentioned, the short range transit plans are a 5-year roadmap for where do we go in the next 5 years, and COVID definitely did throw us for a loop on this one, and we had some changes in our process as a result of the timing of this and what the priorities were of the plan coming out of this. I think and this is something that we're struggling with in almost every piece of work that we do. that, we're using, not where are we from a ridership perspective right now, but instead thinking it's like, here's where we were before the pandemic hit. And that gives us a goal in terms of, what we can expect moving forward and what a target is that we can ultimately reach. Now, when COVID hit, the lockdown and the shelter in place order had immense implications on LAFTA services and the Bay Area in particular. Initially ridership went down by 90%, across the board everywhere, and agencies reduced the amount of service that they had in order to accommodate this. And LAFTA went through a series of steps to reduce services, to in essence, have a lifeline skeletal network out there. And this network has started to regrow as ridership has responded and revenues have responded. But ultimately, as we think about the impacts of COVID and, hearing the conversation earlier, how Livermore is going through it, or my daughter has it right now, or, however it is, it's like, what are some of the things that we need to do collectively, to restore ridership and, as importantly, to restore service back to pre-pandemic levels. So the recovery has started, and we're seeing this in ridership, not just locally, but also on a national level. On a national level, our transit ridership is about 50% to 60% pre-pandemic levels. On average, there's a couple of outliers that that are higher than that. There's a couple of outliers a little bit lower to that. But overall, one of the key themes is also that we're seeing from some of the data is that the Bay Area is lagging behind some of the national trends that we're seeing. And we see several different reasons associated with that. And it doesn't mean these are the only reasons, but these are some of the big reasons that are associated with it. There's changes in some of the work travel, in the operator shortages, and also how schools are transporting kids and how schools are handling that. So I'm going to talk about each one of these a little bit closer in the following slides, but wanted to start off with saying, where are we today? And if we think about LAFTA and compare it to some of the other agencies that directly tie into the services here, LAFTA is a little over a third of its pre-pandemic ridership, so still significantly down. But BART is even further down. They're just over a quarter of their previous ridership, and ACE is less than 20% of its previous ridership. So this shows the magnitude of our challenges, that of the markets that we're trying to serve. But it also comes down to what are some of the things, like what are some of the core reasons behind this lagging ridership? And one of them is how people are going to work, and also how much service we can put on the street. There's a nationwide operator shortage right now, and so agency after agency is having difficulty attracting new operators to come work for them, and most agencies have either cut service or not re-implemented service as fast as they would have liked. And so ultimately, this leads us into a situation where we can say, yes, LAFTA ridership is down by almost 40%, but service levels have not recovered either. So there is a relationship between how much service you have out there and how much ridership comes out of there. And therefore, that is one of the key causes of how can we attract folks to come back? One of the other things, and this is something that we've seen in the Bay Area in particular, is that the ability to telecommute has fundamentally changed some of the commute patterns. Not all the commute patterns, but some of the commute patterns, and enough of the commute patterns to have an impact. We found that close to 30% of employees can telecommute, and even as offices are saying you need to come back to work, it's always in but only for 3 days out of the week. So there's still some maturation of what the travel markets is ultimately going to look like, but it's not just the folks that can telecommute, but all the support services may not be as needed as they were in the past, which again has an impact on some of the travel patterns. BART is predicting that their ridership is going to grow, but it's not going to grow as fast, or it's not going to be instantaneous. It's going to take years to get back to their previous ridership levels. And BART has made a commitment that they're going to be flexible in how they restore their service levels. But to their credit, I mean, they have restored their service levels to every 15 minutes, to serve the Tri-Valleys again. And one of the things that if we look at how BART has restored service and where we are with LAFTA is that LAFTA's 2 highest ridership routes, which used to meet every BART train on weekdays, no longer do. So there's the routes 10R and 30R have not reached the service levels that BART services had. And one of the things that caused people to begin using LAFTA services, or the 10R, the 30R, or a myriad of other routes, is parking availability at the BART stations. And both Pleasanton and Dublin don't have some of the parking issues that they used to. And so it reduces some of the demand on the bus services out there. As I mentioned earlier, we don't know exactly, what does a return to office truly mean on a long-term basis. We have some ideas what that might look like on a shorter term basis, but as the things mature, we're going to have to know what that looks like. And this has an impact for BART, not just, going to San Francisco on BART, but also for the local office parks, such as Hacienda, which has been a core market for LAFTA over the years. And ultimately, one of the other elements of service is, how will the retail market, respond? San Francisco Premium Outlets or Stone Ridge Mall may not be as strong of an anchor as they have been in the past. And with Stone Ridge in particular, being slightly weaker of those two. But at the same time, we're starting to see demands for rural requests for services, whether it's the Livermore Labs or also at Hacienda for new services. So there are stirrings of, we want to see service come back. We want you to restore some of the services that have been out there. And so, since the pandemic began, there have been service restorations. We've been in March with, services, March 2021, service was restored to schools. In June, pre-COVID levels on many of the coverage routes was restored. And, but at the same time, we had challenges with operator shortages, and some of the peak services on some of the key routes dropped back down to 30-minute service in August of 2021. And so as we think about, how do we restore ridership? Part of the element is, how do we make sure that we have the operators, in order to make this happen? And so with that as a context of, understanding that we see the market starting to grow, the market starting to come back, it's not a matter of due to the operator shortage, it's not a matter of that we can just say, okay, we're going to flip a switch and we can, restore all the services. But instead, we see a phased approach as more operators become available as being the path forward. And so we have 3 different priorities we're looking at here. One of them is restoring in peak hour 15-minute service on the 10R and the 30R, the 2 most productive, highest ridership routes that LAFTA operates, but also responding to some of the comments that we've had from the lab as well as Hacienda, to start rebuilding the commuter markets, to start setting things up for that. And the third priority is to restore any of the remaining local rapid express services to pre-pandemic levels. This is what we see as the most viable step of trying to balance the operator availability as well as the need to rebuild ridership and regrow the system as it is right now. So the next steps is to begin to present the short range transit plan to the board for adoption this June, and take some of the other elements of like, where should LAFTA go in the longer term? Once this crisis has passed, we stop thinking about, how do we respond to the immediate restoring ridership, restoring operators, getting service back out there, and becoming, a more viable part of the community and transportation network where we used to be prior to the pandemic. We want to initiate a long-range transit plan, and this will have additional board engagement that talks about missions, values, service trade-offs, what markets we should begin looking at, and should we think beyond the 40-foot bus, again, to help us understand what is most successful here, to create that vision for the future. It's like, we know we've gone through something right now, let's plan and see where we can go in the future. With that, I believe that concludes, the formal presentation, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Mr. Whitman? And I see Mayor Brown has her hand up. Carla?
Yes, thank you. And I am looking forward to restoring some of these routes. But Thomas, when you showed one of your PowerPoints about the return on investment, how much money is coming back on some of these routes, you showed the 20X and I believe the 70X. There we go. See those 0 zeros and the 580X? Are those routes in motion or are those really carrying no riders?
I'll answer that. The 20X and the 70X are scheduled to resume operation on June the 6th. So those will be coming back. This is current as of today, but on June the 6th, we'll have full service on the 20X between the BART station and the lab, and we'll be running about 1/3 of the service on the 70X, which serves Pleasant Hill, Walnut Creek, and the BART station.
Hey, Tony, I want us to watch that because that route, that 70X, has not traditionally had many riders. And if we don't have the riders, it is an expensive route for a lab to go all the way to Pleasant Hill in traffic. And, we had talked about in that 680 using the shoulder of the road and so forth with the Contra Costa transportation. I just wouldn't want to see that. And then, of course, the other zeros, which are 2 and 11 and 580X, are those not in use at this time?
Correct. The 580X is the one that goes from downtown Livermore to the BART station. That's not in operation. The 11 was a peak hour only service. You can see it only ran 5 hours a day pre-COVID. And its ridership is very low. So we're not recommending to bring that back as a priority. And the Route 2, we did bring back, it has very low ridership it runs morning and afternoon rush hour also, but probably 80 to 90% of the ridership is on one trip in each direction, and that trip serves Fallon Middle School. So we did bring back that trip in the morning and the afternoon to serve Fallon, but we did not bring back the others.
Okay, so it's needed for Fallon. It can't be added on to any of the other school trippers.
Correct.
Okay, and last question, which isn't displayed here, so I'm hoping Tony can help. We have our business relationships with things like Uber and Lyft. Are those in use at all at this time?
Yes, they are. Tone is on in the meeting, and he's in charge of the Go Tri-Valley project, and I believe he probably would have the latest numbers on that.
I don't want to go off our agenda item. I just want to find out. So I will respect.
They are in use, yes.
Yes, at some other time. That's right. It was Go Tri-Valley. I remember we tried some interesting other names, but Go Tri-Valley. Okay, I'll follow that as an agenda item for the future. Thank you.
So I was on mute. Thank you. Director Bonanno?
Yeah, I just have a question about the 10R and the 30R, the 15 versus the 30-minute service. Do we know what's our expectation? If we go back to 15 minutes, do we think we're going to just spread out the same riders? Is it just an improvement in service for the people that use it in the sense that they'll sync up their transition a little bit better to BART or whatever they're doing? They'll have that opportunity to have a finer granularity in terms of the service? Or do we think that going back to 15 minutes will actually increase the ridership? And sort of a follow-up to that is, do we ever look at these routes in terms of dollars per rider to sort of know whether, there's an optimization of how much service we provide, but there's a trade-off in terms of how much it costs us. So those are my questions.
Let me start off with the 15-minute service versus 30-minute service. There is in virtually every service plan where I've increased service, from 30 minutes to 15-minute service, we have seen new riders come out of the woodwork as a result. Market research has consistently shown that 15-minute service is frequent enough that you can travel without a schedule, and thus is able to attract people, discretionary riders who would not, who would think the service would be too inconvenient otherwise in order to use it. So, I mean, some of the rules have been rewritten the past 2 years, but I can pretty much guarantee that you'll be adding new riders as a result of going from 30-minute service to 15-minute service on those 2 routes, because I know what the land uses are, I know what the destinations are along there, and they will, the ridership will come back. It's not that, if you turn up, if you increase the service from 30-minute service to 15-minute service, ridership's not going to double overnight during those times, but it will grow consistently. And one of the patterns that we saw when we introduced 15-minute service on some of these, we saw that ridership grow, and we'd expect something similar to happen in the past. That being said, looking at what the productivity numbers are, or the cost per rider, is one of the things that things like the short range transit plan does typically look at to identify, are we getting the bang for the buck for this, and is it worth it to, is it worth the level of investment? And I think us looking at not just what are the hours right now, but looking at what are some of the, what was ridership in 2019, and did that meet the regional goals and standards that we set out for ourselves? And both the 30R and the 10R, with 15-minute service pre-pandemic, certainly were the highest ridership routes that you had. So it's hopefully that answered your question.
It did, thank you. And I just appreciate all the data that you showed. That's what drives good decisions, is having good data. I appreciate the report very much. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Howard.
Yeah, yes, you mentioned things like shifting demand from the retail segment, retail shifting and changing. You mentioned Stone Ridge Mall and the Livermore outlets. Are you looking ahead to future uses? For example, I see a lot going on at Stone Ridge Mall. Mayor Brown knows a lot more about it than I do, but where you might see some reduction in retail square footage, you'll likely see more increase in office space. And so are we contemplating what's going to be there in the future? And it seems like office would be more of a, if you go to work there every day, then that'll be perhaps an increase in ridership. And so that's one question, but then a longer range question is, are we also contemplating for when it does happen, knock on wood, the future stations for Valley Link will likely require a change in routing? Are we going to just worry about that later, or are we thinking ahead to when that happens?
I'll start with the second question first. That will be part of the long range transit plan and part of the discussion with you collectively in terms of like, what can we change, what should we change, and how do we plan ahead for that tremendous investment that is coming to the region. It's on the side of how retail is transitioning, or how some of those spaces potentially transitioning. I think one of the keys here is that we identify that as an opportunity. It's certainly not suggesting we reduce service anywhere close to Stone Ridge Mall more than what it is today. We see that square footage. It's prime locations for certain types of usage, and there will be a market. It may look different. An office market travel pattern is different from a retail travel pattern. There's still good and healthy travel patterns, but one of them tends to be more all day. The other one tends to be more focused on the traditional 9 to 5. And so it's just, again, being aware of what is the strength of that market and how to best serve that market is one of the things we want to keep an eye out on. But certainly we recognize, it wasn't to say that we were going to say, oh, we don't have to serve any of these places anymore. But it's like, hey, we need to be aware that the timing and the frequency of trips, and when the big bulks of trips coming to those destinations, that may change. That change is gradual. It's not just snapping your finger. So it's something we want to take care of, be aware of, and plan for, from a contingency perspective.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I don't see any more questions from my colleagues, so I'm going to weigh in with a few. First of all, I really appreciate the report and gives us a snapshot of where we are now, where we want to go. And I understand that the idea of the short-term plan is to set us up for the long-term plan. I do have a few questions, though, about the data. Using 2019 data for how we were delivering transit service is clearly the right thing to do, since the pandemic disrupted absolutely everything. And using the ridership benchmarks from 2019 and how many people were on each route and how many routes we were running and what the frequency we were running is all absolutely the right thing to do. But the detailed report, not the presentation here, but the detailed report that was attached to our agenda packet goes into quite a bit of demographic detail and helps us set us up for the future and sort of set the table for the long-term report that we want to look into as far as changing patterns and where we might want to serve and where our gaps are. And that data is from 2017 and 2018. And that concerns me a little bit, because while there was such a disruption to transit in 2019, 2020, 2021, there was not that much of a disruption in housing, for example, and there wasn't that much disruption in the Bay Area as far as some types of jobs. And so I'm concerned that we're using data that is so outdated to say where the population centers are and what that population looks like. So I'm clearly not an expert on what Pleasanton and Livermore look like, but I have a pretty good picture of what Dublin looks like. And some of the maps that we're using as far as what the makeup of the city of Dublin looks like is pretty incorrect to me. As far as, where the growth has been, what the income levels are, what the population of non-white residents looks like in some of those areas. And so that concerns me just a tiny bit, that we're using that data to then set the table for where might we have service gaps and where might we need to increase routes or decrease routes. So that was one comment that I just want us to be very mindful of, that we do have more recent data than that. And I know we started this project before COVID hit and we kind of shelved it a little bit, but we do have more recent data that we should probably be looking at, the 2020 census key among it, right? And so I'd like us to make sure that we're really using good data when we start looking at the long-term service plan.
I think, first of all, in any heavily growing area in Dublin, and the region is certainly heavily growing and changing. It's a changing picture. So you're using a snapshot that's already 2 years out of date minimum, to begin with. But I completely recognize, the census data, that a new tranche of data became available from the 2020 census that can shed further light on things. And as we look at the long range transit plan elements, we will be not looking at 2017 or 2018 data, but the most recently available.
Wonderful. And then my other comment was that on some of these routes, and I appreciate Carla bringing up the 20X and the 70X and just making sure that the ridership as we bring those routes back justifies having those routes. I know you mentioned in your next step slides, board engagement for goals and visions and things like that. We want to make sure that we're serving the people we need to serve in the most efficient way possible. And I know Tony's great at marketing and Tone is great at optimizing the routes that we have. We just really want to be mindful that we are letting folks know we're bringing those routes back and making sure that we're getting the right number of people on those routes, and that the people that we want to serve are getting served, and then having benchmarks that we know where we can make good decisions about how we are providing service and what services we're providing. So I appreciate the fact that you've got board engagement on your list of next steps, so that because we have all these benchmarks and the report says we're not meeting them. And so we need to figure out why that is and how we can meet them, and what changes we need to make if we're not meeting them. And then the last comment I'll make is about the on-time data. And I think that when we see on-time data, we all assume, if we're not knee deep in the weeds, that means if we're not meeting the on-time data, that means that we're late. And for the school trippers, the data is often that they were early, and that's probably okay. And so we might want to change our benchmark for the school tripper routes to be early to the school, not, on time to the last preschool stop, and you know what I mean, prior to the school stop. Or, but on time early or on time, just not late to the school itself, so that we're not putting out data that looks like the school trippers are late to school 60% of the time, because I don't believe that that's what the data shows. So maybe a number that actually shows how often are they late to school, because that's the number that matters. So just changing what we're reporting there would be super helpful. So those are the only comments or questions that I have.
So those buses could be on time going to Dublin High School if you'd like the 6-lane Amador Parkway.
No, I'll get right on that.
All right.
But I do believe that there was a caveat in the report that says that the data for all the school trippers shows that they're only on time around average of 60% of the time, but that quite often that on time data means we're actually to the school early because
Correct.
hold at stop once they get to the last stop. So I just don't want people to think that the buses are late all the time. I know they are sometimes late because of traffic, and particularly in Dublin, just because of the way our streets are laid out right now. But I'd love to see the breakdown there of
Right.
often they're actually late versus early, because I think early is fine on the school tripper routes.
Yes.
Carla.
Yeah, if I may just comment about that. When we, that was a whole separate meeting about what's early and what's late. For example, timing so that the BART train comes in. You don't want the bus to leave right before the train comes in, right? So what is late and what is early? And that this was a few years ago, we had a big discussion about that window of time. And so late, I think for you in the school district is thinking late to school, and we're thinking outside of our window of delivery. Maybe Tony knows that, but it's like 5 minutes, let's say.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. But if you come early and you leave early and the school hasn't let out yet, then you're really not serving your students. So that
Yes.
whole early late is I think how we define early late in our window of delivery. So just wanted to offer that perspective.
And I was only talking about further defining that caveat on the school tripper routes, because there was that note within our staff report that talked about how the school tripper window showed that, or the school tripper data was perhaps slightly misleading, because we do define on time as being X number of minutes, and somebody can fill in X and Y here, X number of minutes late or Y number of minutes early, right? And on the school tripper routes, they don't hold after the last pickup stop on the way to school. They just, if they're early at that point, but they've got all the kids that are coming, they just then move on to school. And so that can skew the data, because they end up early to the school site, early arriving on the morning runs, getting to the school site. And that skews their on-time data, because technically they're not on time, they're early. They didn't leave anybody behind at the school stop. They picked everybody up, but their final destination, they're early for their scheduled arrival, and that skews their on-time data. And so that's all I'm talking about. I'm not talking about
Right.
the rapid routes or anything like that. We clearly want to know that they met the BART train and they didn't leave anybody behind. They didn't pull out early, those kinds of things. So that's all I was talking about.
So as a follow-on, Tony, if the bus is ahead of schedule, like the board director was discussing, would the bus driver usually pull over and catch up on a 2-minute, like in a loop, so that they can be on time, or do they just charge forward?
No, they don't charge forward. They're not ever supposed to run early. That's like the cardinal sin of transit, is to run early. And so if they do find themselves ahead of a time point, they will pull over at a bus stop. Sometimes you'll see a bus in a bus stop with its flashers on. And that's just to get back on schedule. It happens frequently, believe it or not, on the stretch of Stanley between Livermore and Pleasanton. I've seen on more than one occasion, people exceeding the speed limit on that road. And our buses are not exempt from that. And as a result, they sometimes arrive in Pleasanton early and pull over near the McDonald's there on First Street.
Every once in a while, you get all the green lights.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, you get lucky.
All right, does anyone have any further questions on this item? Okay, we need a recommendation, somebody to move the recommendation that we forward this report to the full board.
I'll move approval.
A second, Brown.
Thank you. We have Bonanno and Brown move the item. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Vice Chair Bonanno,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Aye.
Director Halbert,
Aye.
Chair Josie.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We'll move to item number 6, the contract award for LAFTA's on-call bus consulting services.
Thank you. That one's mine. Chair Josie, if you don't mind, I would like to answer Mayor Brown's question regarding Go Tri-Valley before I dive into the next item.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so Go Dublin was expanded to Go Tri-Valley to cover the two city back in May of 2020. So it's been about 24 months since the inception of the expansion. In terms of the number of trips that were subsidized, in the first 6 months, we were averaging about 400 trips per month. And in the last 6 months, we have been averaging 1,100 trips per month, so almost triple. So we have seen a steady increase since May of 2020. I think in the future, we can include this set of data in the board packet. So you can keep price of the progress of the program.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Tone, do you think that they're leaving the fixed route and taking the Go Tri-Valley as a way to feel safer during COVID times? And just like we had at some time where everybody was taking paratransit instead of fixed route was down, paratransit was through the roof. We had to direct people back to, no, you qualify for fixed route and you need to do fixed route.
So I'm not sure if it's in direct competition, but I think the original intention of accelerating the program back then was because we were scaling back on our fixed route service. So we wanted to have a replacement to complement it, to give people options. The data is there, so we can dive deeper into it to see if there's any overlap between the trips I've taken over through Go Tri-Valley and what our fixed route service offers.
Yeah, if you're going almost vacant fixed route and your Go Tri-Valley is 4 times and all other transit is like 30%. And you see one go to 4 times. It's just a very interesting data point. Okay, all right, I'll be quiet for a while, thanks.
But keep in mind the cost on Go Tri-Valley based on the average cost per trip for the riders is over $5 per trip. So it's much more expensive than our fixed route service. Okay, so to the next item. So this item before you is to approve a resolution recommending the board to award contracts for on-call zero-emission bus consulting services to 2 firms, Center for Transportation and the Environment, or CTE, and Zen Clean Energy Solution. So a little background on this item. So in the absence of an in-house expert on zero-emission bus technology, an RFP was issued and a consultant was brought on board in 2016. The type of work included in this contract was grant writing, technical support, plan development, with the latest one being the zero-emission bus rollout plan. With the term of that agreement expire at the end of 2021, LAFTA issued a new RFP in March of this year. We had a panel consisting of LAFTA and AC Transit staff that evaluate the proposals. There were 2 firms that scored really well in response to the RFP. There's a lot more details in the staff report for your information. But I think the bottom line is we have 2 very qualified firms. Our approach was we looked at their qualification within each of the discipline and then identify the most qualified firm for each discipline. So since this is an on-call contract, the idea is as project come up, we would engage with the top ranked firm for each type of work. So that, again, this particular contract award has no funding associated with it because it is an on-call contract. There's no fiscal impact, but individual task order could go to the board in the future if the dollar amount exceed the executive director's procurement authority. I think at the moment it's $100,000. So this contract has a 3-year base term and 2 1-year option terms that can be executed at latter discretion. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions from the? I have a question. The contracts are not attached for our review. Is there a not to exceed amount listed in the contract for each of these?
I don't believe so. It is an on-call, so it's driven by task orders.
Are there rates listed in those contracts?
There are, as part of the proposal, so it would be included in the agreement.
Is the finance committee looking at those contracts before it comes to the full board?
At this moment, no, but that's something I'm not sure Tamara want to chime in, because we're debating whether this should go to the finance or PNS, and ultimately because it's project driven, we decided to take it to PNS.
Is it standard for one of the two subcommittees to look at the contracts before they're forwarded to the full board?
Generally, the board actually approves the executive director to enter into a contract. So the contract kind of comes after the fact. And really the attorneys do all the work on the contract. But that's usually where it comes in.
Sure, I'm not asking us to do the work on the contract. I'm just asking who sees the contract. Does one of the subcommittees look at the contract before the contract is in front of the board to approve?
No, generally the contract itself doesn't go to the board. The board approves for the executive director to enter into the contract. The contract itself doesn't usually actually go to the board on procurements. But we could do that. It wouldn't be this month. It would be the following month, more than likely. And we could share the proposals, which have those details if the committee or the board would like to see those.
Okay. The contracts themselves have not been coming to the board at all?
The board's been approving the executive director to enter into a contract following all our, policies and procedures.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Just clarify, Tone did mention though that for each particular use of either of these contracts, there's a not to exceed amount that the executive director has authority to approve. Above that, though, something would come to the board. Is that my understanding? But there's nothing that says an accumulated number of uses of this contract exceeding a certain amount would come to the board. Did I get that about right?
That's correct.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll move.
We have a motion from Halbert. Do we have a second?
A second, Brown.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Bonanno,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Yes.
Director Halbert,
Yes.
Chair Josie,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Item number 7, which is the TAC recruitment for terms starting fiscal year 2022-23.
Jennifer, I think you might have to move. Oh, there she is.
She's moved over.
Okay.
For to unmute.
Okay, hello?
Hello.
I don't see the video, but I guess that's okay. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. All right. Start my, okay. Okay, that's different. Sorry about that.
It's okay, take your time.
Start your video. Are you able to do that? Or do you just want to start your
It's kind of
presentation?
all blocked out.
We can hear you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just go and do the little audio version. Yeah, it looks different. It says it can't start the video. All right. So the Tri-Valley Accessible Advisory Committee, or TAC, advises LAFTA on accessibility issues facing disabled and senior residents on wheels, fixed route and paratransit services. TAC is comprised of 11 members and four alternates representing Livermore, Dublin, Pleasanton, Alameda County, and social services. And there is also one seat for Alameda CTC Paratransit Advisory Committee PAPCO representative. The terms for TAC are for 2 years. Currently, 2 alternate seats are vacant, and 11 of the current members and alternates have their terms expiring on June 30th this year. So every spring, LAFTA conducts recruitment for new members. And we did so this year as well by releasing a news release and to various news outlets, as well as LAFTA website. This time around, we received 12 applications for 13 open member and alternate seats. The received applications, as well as the membership term roster, are attached to the staff report in your packet. So with the applications received, the TAC would have all the regular member and alternate seats filled, except for one alternate position, because we didn't receive enough applications. And for the sake of time, I was not going to go into detail of the applications received and to which positions, but there is much more detail in your staff report. The current TAC members reviewed the applications at their meeting on May 4th. And staff is asking the Projects and Services Committee to forward the recommendation to ratify the TAC appointments to the LAFTA Board of Directors.
Okay.
That's my short report.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? I have one question. How is it that we ended up with 11 of the 13 members up for reappointment, those positions all on the same cycle? Can anybody give me the history on that?
Audrey, do you have the history or just a coincidence? Because they're all 2 years terms, correct?
Correct. It is a coincidence. Yes. So now it's like last year, only 3 members turned over, and this time it was 11. So yeah.
I'm not quite sure how that would have come to pass. Wouldn't we want it to be 6 and 7 on a alternating cycle so that we don't have 11 positions up at one time?
That's Chair Josie, that's before my time. So I can definitely look back at the history and get back to you with an answer. I don't want to speculate.
Okay, is there desire to remedy that situation? To make recruitment easier?
I'm not sure we have the flexibility within the bylaws to do that, but that's another question I'll look into.
Okay.
After the meeting.
That would be great. Any other questions?
I would support the desire to get to the bottom of how we got here in this configuration of cycle and how to get out of it by changing the bylaws if needed. But I think having staggered positions and the way Chair Josie described would be a better, smoother thing to do, where we're recruiting for either 6 or 7 in a year, not 11. So My
I-
guess is somebody resigned and got appointed to I just can't even, I just don't understand how we got there, but whether we give somebody an extra year in order to change that, I would be supportive of that, or appoint somebody to just a 1 year so that it corrects the cycle, however we want to do it. It just seems to be the better way to be.
Dr. Brown?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kadri, is there an open seat in Pleasanton beyond, I know we have Jeffrey and then we have Sue. And then I thought I read that Sue's applying, but there are 2 open seats.
Yes, there is 1 member seat and 1 alternate. So
And Jeffrey's not going to go back for
Jeffrey
the,
did not apply,
oh, he did not apply.
reapply.
And
So
what is your outreach for members? Because it seems like we get the same people and I see lots of people around town that have, that would probably qualify for a TAC position. Do you put it in the newspaper or?
yes, we issue a press release, and Tony can correct me, but I believe it went out to Patch, Independent, Pleasanton Weekly, and we also had it on our website.
Put it on the bus door.
Mhm.
The door of the bus,
That's right.
or on the seats. Put it on the front seat.
That's right. Start passing it around to people who ride. That's true. Because it would certainly be nice to see some new faces. I know Dublin has had Sean for a long time, and Sean's awesome. But it's nice to have multiple people share the responsibility of community involvement. Okay, thank you.
And perhaps on the recording on the paratransit answer line as well.
Good point.
We're recruiting in the future. Okay, any other questions on this? If not, I'll take a motion to recommend these appointments to the full board.
I move
So
adjourned.
moved. Second.
Aye. Okay, you guys can fight it out. I heard Bonanno and Brown.
Then Bonanno first, and I will be a second, please.
That's the order I heard it in, so that's perfect. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, Vice Chair Bonanno,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Hi.
Director Halbert,
Aye.
Chair Josie.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 8, which is approval of the updated Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan.
This is me again. So in 2018, the FTA published the final rule for the PTAS, requiring transit agency to develop safety plan that include an SMS or safety management system with processes and procedure. The deadline to have a PTAS in place was July of 2021. Our plan was actually approved by the board in December of 2020. And annually, we will continue to review and make necessary updates. And that's why I'm here today. Additionally, with the recent passing of the bipartisan infrastructure law, a few new requirements have been added to the PTAS. The first requirement is that the safety committee, which will consist of equal number of frontline employees and management representative. We always had a safety committee, and they convene monthly. We just now need to make sure the committee makeup consists of 2 people from the frontline, 2 people on the admin side. And that has already happened. The second requirement is to document strategy and mitigation to minimize exposure to infectious diseases consistent with guidelines from the CDC. So throughout the pandemic, LAPTA implemented a number of strategy and initiative to minimize exposure. These initiatives include requiring daily self-check for COVID symptom prior to starting work, maintaining social distance, enforcing mask mandates, disinfecting high-touch areas inside the vehicle throughout the day, installing hand sanitizer stations, germ barriers, and onboard air purification system, dispatching extra standby buses to prevent overcrowding, and implementing remote meetings and work from home policies. These strategies are now documented in the PTAS. So with that, staff recommends the Project Services Committee refer Resolution 24-2022 to the Board of Directors for approval of the LAPTA updated PTAS document. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Okay, I have one, and that is on the COVID protocols that are attached to this very detailed and comprehensive safety plan that I'm sure we all read every single page before the meeting today. The COVID protocols haven't been updated, I don't believe, since 2020, I think was the date on here. And as we know, the protocols have changed frequently and often, and confusingly so. And the protocols that are in the safety plan here still talk about masks being required and 14-day quarantine periods and things like that. Do we have a strategy for making sure that the COVID safety protocols that are in our approved plan update with updated recommendations from the health plan? So instead of specifically laying out, yes, you have to mask, no, you don't have to mask. The quarantine period is 14 days. No, it's 5 days. No, it's 5 days with a negative test. No, it's actually 10 days. Like, so we don't have to continually update it and send it to the board for approval. Is there a mechanism that we could use to say the most up-to-date recommendations? You know, we will follow the Alameda County Health Department's updated recommendations on masking, on isolation protocols, on quarantining, and those can be found here and have the updated link instead of specifically calling out masking, testing, quarantining, vaccination, you know, whatever, those kinds of things that are subject to quick change, because the data that's actually called out in our plan, both in the MTC manual and also in the attached addendum from Tony, are outdated already. And I'm hesitant to approve something that is not what we're actually doing because it was written before the most current data. Does that make sense?
It does. And first off, thank you for reading the plan. So it is a challenge putting incorporating the changes in the updated plan because it's constantly changing. So your input is very appreciative. So we can try to generalize and kind of set a structure where we will adhere to, I think our practice has always been, we looked at Alameda County Public Health, the state, and the CDC, whichever is restricted, we would follow. So maybe that's something that we would highlight in the plan. So regardless which one it is, at least we know we're gonna follow that one. So that's something I guess we can incorporate when we bring the plan to the board. If
Yeah, I would appreciate, that would be my recommendation, would be that we just make that one change in those two places, both in the I'm losing my acronyms, in both of those sections where we call out, these are exactly what all of our COVID protocols are. So that we aren't having to change things on the fly, because the other things that we're doing, the fogging and the hand sanitizer stations and all of those other things are consistent and they're our own internal practices. But the things where we have to follow other people's guidance, let's just say we're following these people's guidance and a link to what that guidance is.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Brown.
Yeah, great idea, Chair Josie. One question, Tone, Department of Transportation, do we have to meet DOT standards or are we on Alameda County standards?
Can you clarify on which standard you're referring to?
Oh, well, the DOT, the Department of Transportation, is sometimes got some different requirements. For example, masking has been different than the Alameda County, which is not a transportation organization. But I really like the idea of refer to this for additional details.
So I think Tony's on the call, so hopefully he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think because there are 3 layers between FTA, the CDC, the state OSHA, and the county public health, we usually follow whichever is the strictest. Does that make sense?
And the masking at the federal level was TSA.
Oh, TSA.
You're muted.
Carla, you're muted.
So you're using masking at the federal level, but at this moment, it's the most strict. But that
Most
may
strict,
change.
yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Always most strict.
Always most strict. Okay.
Are there any other questions? With that, I'd actually like to make the motion myself that we recommend the that we recommend this be forwarded to the board for approval with the change, that we include that information and direct to the 3 different websites and call out that we will use the protocol that is the most strict.
I'm happy to second. Oh, okay. Just as a matter of discussion, when you have a full protocol and you say the most strict, would we have an attorney challenge us? Not just about masking and hand cleaning, but sometimes these are very big requirements. I just want to make sure that we're accurate when you come back to the board, but I'm happy to support.
I think that a lot of agencies have been following that. I think we'd be challenged, but we should probably have our attorney weigh in on that. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Halbert was the second that I heard. Can we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Bonanno,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Aye.
Director Halbert,
Aye.
Chair Josie.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Do we have an interim director's report?
We do. Sorry, I'm helping Melissa on something. I'll make this quick since we're running a little over. Ridership is up. Not much, but it's slow and steady. It's climbing. We're excited. MTC is rolling out the Institutional Transit Pass pilot program, which has been in the works since before COVID, I believe. And how that will work, it's not going to affect us probably right now because none of our local institutions have been chosen for the pilot. But there could be students of like San Francisco State that live out here. So the awesome thing about this pilot is that if they have that institutional pass, they would now be able to use it on any transit system in the Bay Area. What hasn't been worked out yet exactly is how we're getting paid for that. But this part, they're trying to find the information from running the pilot. The idea being that you have the institutional pass, you shouldn't then also have to buy a Wheels pass and a BART pass and every other transit system you're riding, except for that one that applies to. So I personally think it's going to be great for people in the Bay Area. We'll just have to see how it shakes out in terms of revenue because that has not been settled. But the goal is for nobody to lose money. I met with Supervisor Nate Miley last week. And staff members. He's the president of United Seniors of Oakland and Alameda. And I met with some of the staff members from the organization. They're going to come out and take a tour. And we're going to do some trip planning because sometimes they travel train seniors who are from like Oakland, Hayward, a little further west out here. So we're going to do some trip planning so that she can do that. And then they are having an event for seniors at the fairground on July 29th. And they're thinking that a lot of those participants will be coming via BART. And so we're going to help them get out to the fairgrounds. Last year they did it as a drive-through, but this year they're hoping to get more people out since they can have it in person and they can have it at the fairgrounds outside with free flowing air. So they're very excited. And it was just kind of nice to meet with them. The Rutan landscaping project is going. We've hit a couple bumps. There was a section a very small section, but section nonetheless, that was not on the architect's plans. That was not going to match everything else and the plants were dying. So we had those removed. And we had some plants that we were going to leave because they gave kind of a barrier between like the smoking section and the lunch section outside in the street. And the idea was that the drivers and mechanics kind of would like that barrier. However, the plants in that barrier had started dying off. There was an invasive other plant growing into them, and it had been turned into a rodent motel. So pretty much when they said rodent, I said, yeah, those should come out. So those came out and they're going to be replaced with fresh tall plants that'll provide that barrier, but that aren't diseased and providing housing to rodents.
Get feral cats from Oakland Coliseum.
We actually have a few stray cats in this neighborhood that I see every so often, but they're apparently not doing their job out here. It's not just squirrels. I guess squirrels are the majority, but we apparently also have some rats who have made their homes in there. Partially because when they removed the plants, there was a whole lot of garbage that had been thrown in there. So we'll be working on that with our employees as well. And then the Livermore Police Department Explorer program is coming out for some training. They run a couple different scenarios on our buses of how they would respond if something happened on a bus. They haven't been out since pre-COVID, of course, because they probably haven't done a lot in person. The SWAT team comes out every few years as well to do a similar training, just in case they ever need to do something on a bus. They know where all the exits are, all the ways in and out, that kind of thing, the communication system. So we're excited to be hosting them. They'll be coming out on this Saturday. And the Dublin parking garage, there was the 20 million for the parking garage, and there was 500,000 for a hub study. And through the hub study, Tony was able to save us some money and didn't spend the full 500,000. So we're able to move that over to the actual parking garage construction. That should be approved by CalSTA in June, I believe is when it goes on their agenda. And I believe that the county is ready to issue, or almost ready to issue, their notice to proceed. So we might actually see some construction sometime soon, which would be awesome. But I just issued a letter saying that we approved them to issue their notice to proceed, because
Re-groundbreaking. Let's have a re-groundbreaking.
when we can get a date, we can get that scheduled, and that would be a lot of fun, because I don't think anyone who was at the last groundbreaking is still around.
You still have the shovel?
I still have my shovel.
Bring it with you.
There we go. And that is it for the interim executive director report.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I don't see any hands, so we will move to the preview of upcoming committee agenda items. Is there anything you'd like to call out for us? It seems pretty straightforward. Okay,
Tony, did Michael used to do this, or did you guys do this?
Michael did, but we didn't spend a lot.
Okay, good. I always did it on my committee, so I wasn't sure how they did it on theirs. Yeah, there's nothing super exciting coming up that we know of.
Is there anything that anyone would like to initiate, matters initiated by committee members? Anything you would like brought back? Okay, with that, we will adjourn until June 27th, but don't go anywhere, folks. We're staying right here on this link. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
That
correct.
is correct. It'll
Okay.
take just a moment.
I will adjourn this meeting at 4:07.